my name's Attinson. I'm our product manager for data and interoperability. I've been with Foothold for a little over 14 years. In my current role, I work on our data products, Insights and Data Studio, as well as our modern interoperability products, which are emerging and will be based off of FHIR, which is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource. And I really get a lot of enjoyment with getting to work with our customers to see how they're using our data products and how we can work with you to make sure that your needs are met as you find new uses for data, so that we can make sure that gets incorporated into our roadmap and that our tools evolve with you and to where you're going with your agency and your work. But it's just been awesome to see the engagement with our data tools by our current customers. I think we have about 100 different customers currently using data right now, which is so exciting. And then also on the Foothold Care Management side, they're also working on accompanying versions of our data tools, which is also exciting. And we're looking forward to working with them to hopefully bridging the data sets at some point in the future. But yeah, again, I hope we get into it on this call. It's just, there have been so many exciting use cases, some that we didn't even fully predict for our data products. And that makes me really excited, because your creativity it feeds back into the tools that we build. Megan, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Megan. I'm the integrations manager at Foothold, and two of the products that I support our customers with, as Alex mentioned, would be Insights as well as Data Studio. And my role is to work with our customers throughout their data journey, from the very, very beginning conversations, exploring how data might fit in or how it should fit into their organization, all the way to what products might support their needs best, to evaluating, kind of creating the single source of truth, which we'll be talking about in a little bit, all the way to the celebration when we have this great kind of marriage of data from multiple sources, beautiful visualizations, and being able to meet an organization's needs. Oh, and I bother Alex daily about new data models that our customers want. So I really listen to our customer stories and make sure that our data team is able to act on those.
Awesome. So I'm really excited to kind of start this conversation. I think a great way to begin the conversation would be, we hear the term data integration kind of all the time. What does that term mean to you? Megan, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. I think that when we're thinking about data integration, I think that, first of all, people interpret that many different ways, especially maybe new customers coming in. We want to be able to integrate or with this other system. But for me, integration is the ability to bring data from multiple sources together into one kind of platform where you can make connections and draw the insights. So it's not always a matter of being able to create records into one system for another, but it's just a method of joining data together to kind of could be dangerous with your organizations and their practices.
And Alex?
Yeah, I kind of think of this perhaps a little unsurprisingly more on a technical level. And I think of data integrations, yes, in terms of content and bringing content together to form a single source of truth, but also in terms of how that data is moving between systems. I think it's really important. And I think that's like reflected in the approach we took at Foothold when we built out our data products. We took a really cloud forward approach. That's why we picked Snowflake as our warehouse vendor. Snowflake underlies both of our data tools, our visualization tool that's powered by Sisense called Insights, and then also Data Studio, which is the tool that gives you direct access to your data in a cloud data warehouse. and I think Snowflake is so core to that because their values align with Footholds in many ways in terms of data democracy, because Snowflake can let you send data out to any other tool. Essentially, it's never going to be a technological blocker. If you have your own data warehouse, that's in Azure or in Amazon Web Services, or even a server sitting under the front desk at your office, you can still use Snowflake to get your data there. And that's really important because making sure your data can move to the place where your team can then access it is really important. And then integrate with either other tools, other data sets, and make sure that it can be as valuable to you as possible, because data that's locked in somewhere is of no use to anybody really. So that's kind of how I think about it.
And Alex, kind of, you mentioned Snowflake specifically, but can you talk, and we are going to get into the single source of truth, but that's a lot of, I think, vendor names and kind of just different like parts of where Snowflake lies in that data structure within Foothold specifically. And then if you can, maybe just also talk about potentially how other organizations might have a different data structure or something, like, if that isn't going to take like an hour itself.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it high level and brief. But yeah, Snowflake is our data warehouse vendor. And their solution is cloud-based, meaning that with security in place, anyone can access it and anyone can send data securely to other providers. I think the other part of that, and again, I won't get too technical, is when you talk about data integrations, you'll hear about pipelines a lot. So what are pipelines? Generally, there's going to be 3 letters you hear associated with pipelines, and it's going to be ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load. And though, I think you can basically keep it to that. You need to take the data out, you need to transform it to a state where it's going to be usable either by the next integrated system or by the data consumers, and then you need to load it into the destination, where it's going to be accessed either again by the integrated system or by the users. So yeah, thank you, Elliot, for giving me the opportunity to clarify that. I think it's extremely important because I think when you get into data world, it can get really complicated and everybody's got a sales pitch, and it kind of sounds like crypto and AI a little bit, which is unfortunate. Because I think we want to keep this as easily consumable as possible. And that's been like our product approach. And then I'd also just say, when it comes to the T in that, the transformation, that's also been our approach with how I bring data forward. So like if you're a current customer of ours that uses one of our data products, Megan is right. She's always submitting product requests. And the reason for that is because we've taken the approach of transforming all of our data from the source. We don't want you to have to transform the data yourself. The tools for that are really complicated. You have to know SQL and Python and a lot of other languages that maybe your agency doesn't want to really get involved with hiring or purchasing the team necessary to do that work. So we really try to do that for you, so that as much as possible you can make the data work for the specific use case that you want. And I think always keeping in mind the solution that you're trying to find with your data is also really important. I think like there's different, I won't go too far in this rant, but I think there's like a lot of steps in what I would call like the data maturity curve. But I think you'll be able to constantly grow on that curve. So long as like you keep the why in perspective at all times, because if you keep the why in perspective, it's going to help when you ask Megan or myself for new data elements, because it's going to help us understand how we can help you, but it's also going to help at your own organization in terms of maybe the people you need to hire to execute on that, or the technology you need to purchase. And it'll just kind of keep you on track. There's no there's a start, there's no defined start or end point for this. It's always going to be a kind of evolving process where you're going to be maturing with how you work with data. So
great. And so the kind of main thing, the focus for today's conversation is around this single source of truth with data. So Meghan, can you just talk about how you look at the single source of truth and why it is so important to us, I would say, and then to an organization?
Well, yeah, I think in terms of an organization, we're just at the point where organizations use more than one system. Not one system is not the solution for everything. And if we don't create this single source of truth, what we have is a lot of siloed data that's not really telling a full story. So, you might be able to get some specifics on your clients in one system, or the individuals you support in one system, and your employees in another, and your vehicles and transportation in another, and maybe your food vendors in another. But in order to really kind of get the organizational structure, being able to move all of that data together and create common bonds between maybe your employees and your van maintenance and your van runs, you're telling a more complete picture and being able to make educated, data-driven organizational decisions. So again, we're not in a stage anymore where one system can handle it all. Our services that our organizations are providing are complex, and their stories, as Alex pointed out, their whys can be complex too. So more often than not, someone will come to me as, the first source in their data journey and saying, this is what I'm trying to solve. And it usually is about creating that single source of truth.
Yeah, and Alex, before you hop in, Meghan, you're talking about all these different systems, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page around those systems. Can be HR systems, they can be services that, systems that are helping you with services. It can be data that you're pulling in from CMS or other entities outside of even that you're not using the documentation. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was driving at.
Perfect. And Alex, can you just, in terms of the single source of truth, maybe from the technical side or just adding to Meghan's, why do you think it's so important that we're here to talk about that?
It's so important to understand the single source of truth at your agency, because awards does a lot of things really well. FCM does a lot of things really well, but I'm going to assume that most organizations, you're not using FCM and awards for every single function. And I think nor is it suitable necessarily to bring data from all those other systems back into awards to then be processed like by a business team or by a QA team or by even like a revenue cycle management team or a team that does quality improvement, quality measures. I know there's a lot of different names for that right now. So it's important to reconcile all that information in one place, and there's a lot of different ways you can do that and be really successful at it. But at the end of the day, you need to set business goals for yourself. And if you can get to the point where you can put a single dashboard in front of your board or your CEO or executive director that answers like core questions, or for your revenue cycle management team, maybe brings in payroll data with your billable data by notes, you're going to put yourself in a really awesome position to advance your business forward, improve the way you're providing care, become more efficient. So it's, there's just a lot of great reasons to invest in this, because you can do a lot of really tremendous things, and it may not happen in awards necessarily. We are looking at ways where we can bring data experiences into awards in new ways, which we'll have more to say on in the next few months. But again, you're the the data components that you're bringing into your source of truth or your warehouse, whatever that repository might be, it's going to vary agency by agency. But I think most likely, and I'd almost be curious to hear from the folks in this call, I'm sure we could all agree that it's important to strive to get to that point where you can kind of have a North Star data wise.
Great. And so I think probably one of the reasons why we have a good attendance for this is, there's probably challenges trying to get to a single source of truth. So can you touch on some of the biggest challenges that you've seen, whether it's our clients or just, people trying to, be more data driven? And Alex, I feel like you want to jump at this question. So take it away.
I have a lot of feelings on this, but I think, and this might be controversial, I think the hardest thing to do is to get everyone at the agency on the same page. IT folks and quality improvement folks and revenue cycle management folks, I like get some pizza and sit in a room and become best friends. And I think that it sounds so easy, but I think resolving how those teams work together is actually the first step. And I think if we had this webinar a few years ago, I probably would have given some boring technical answer. But I actually think that's the most important thing. I think there's like a concept called shadow IT that kind of encompasses how a lot of organizations end up using data tools, and shadow IT can be unnerving to IT departments because it's like there's another team that's implementing a whole bunch of technology, and I don't know what they're doing. And then shadow IT can be unnerving for the data team that's implementing that technology because they may not have the full support of their IT team. And then they may not be working with other aspects of the business that, would make the data more visible and relevant to the executive team. So I actually think resolving those organizational questions is like maybe step one, because then you'll be able to have open and honest conversations about, do we need to bring in talent or do we need to bring in a consultant to help us? And then what technology do we need to execute and scope out the data? And in all of this, like, again, you should always be thinking about why are we doing this and what's important and what problems are we trying to solve? Because I think that if you know that, when you're having pizza amongst these three different teams or whatever, you guys are probably going to agree on most of the same things. Megan, I'm not sure how you feel about that.
It's funny, Alex. I was going to say the exact same thing, and I think as we go through some of our other questions, these trends will come out a bit more and more. But yeah, no, totally agree there.
And it's not a critique of any of those groups. You guys are all great and you're all trying to do the same thing. So like, it's just an observation that I think now that we have gotten to scale with our products, that we've seen that this is not a unique situation.
Well, I think it's similar to when we talked about implementation of like the EHR itself, right? You want everyone having a role and being on the same page, so that makes sense that it would transition into approaching data analytics as well. So Alex, you kind of touched on what you think step one is, but Megan, how does an organization start down the path of getting to a single source of truth?
So I think step one is simply being curious about your data. We have a lot, I think from the poll, 30% of participants are QA type employees, and they tend to be, in my experience, the ones that are most excited, most curious about data in all systems and how to kind of evaluate trends, predictions. So simply being curious about your data, and then going back to Alex, creating that why. So based on your curiosity, what do you want the data to do for you? It might be something, I'm going to call it very, very simple. Like right now, I'm manually checking boxes every time something happens. And I then kind of guess about what's going to happen next month. And can a system or the data that we have make that easier for me or give me better outputs? So coming with those questions and engaging in conversations with your data vendors, whether it's awards, FCM, any other products you're using, is by far the first step. The second step, I'm going to take it a step further, Elliot, if that's okay, is not to be intimidated by the data. It's not necessarily an action step, but just going into the conversation. Um, I'm thinking about this in terms of awards. There's a lot of data, right? If you've been an awards customer for years and years and years, you've gathered a lot of data. Not being intimidated by looking at the outputs, but simply being curious about how to manage it or make it work for you and not seeing it and running away. Definitely another key step in the process. And then just iterating on it. I think I've noticed that the more our customers engage with our data products, the more great ideas happen, the more conversations they have with me or Alex or even with each other. I saw this dashboard and I see how you're doing this. Well, maybe I can do it this way. It's just a method of being creative and iterating on what you've done.
Awesome. Thanks. And so, Alex, would you say that there's any pitfalls that agencies can expect going forward? And, are there any kind of trends that we've seen with our clients that we've worked with on some of these initiatives?
I think with data adoption in general, we're all going to fail a whole lot. That is something I've noticed. It's like there's like definitely a crawl, walk, run dynamic to this that is somewhat unique. Like with EHRs, right? You go from paper using an EHR, and then you can increase your usage of it. But with there's something about data that it take, like, essentially, if you, and this isn't true of not only Foothold but other organizations that I've seen and other organizations that are not in the behavioral healthcare space. I used to just wander around the SciSense conference and ask people where they were at and how many times they've redone their pipeline, and the answer is always a lot. People are all, you're going to, no one's going to go spend more money than they have to on data necessarily to answer questions they don't have yet. So you're going to do the minimum amount, and then you're going to ask more questions, and you may find that the people or the technology and the team can't support your pathway to get answers to that, and you're going to have to evolve from there. So I actually don't see these pitfalls as being negatives. I think you just have to be in the mindset that it's not a process that's ever going to end. And that's not something people probably like to hear. But I kind of believe that to be true. But there's shortcuts you can take, right? Like, so that's why folks used to ask Foothold for raw table access all the time. And we were always, it was like a security problem, A, and then B, it was like, well, what are you going to do with that? So like our approach, we kind of helped folks skip some steps, right? We were like, we're going to transform all the data so you don't have to have a consultant spend 100 hours with us transforming the data, and we're going to move it to a place that's in the cloud right away. And if you kind of match that strategy, you can, like, if you opt maybe to spend a little more now and get cloud tools out of the box, like, again, we use SciSense. SciSense is great for a lot of things, but there's a lot of other great tools in the market, like Sigma, and ThoughtSpot, and Power BI is very good. And I know Tableau's had a rough couple of years, but Tableau is still really good. If you go get a really great tool like that to maybe give yourself an analytics tooling beyond just using Excel, and there's nothing wrong with Excel. It's just an earlier step. And then you also, on the warehouse side, you maybe go get your own Snowflake account instead of using the reader accounts that we offer, and you start to find new ways to ingest data into that to build a larger single source of truth. I think you can start to take shortcuts. But I think in the accompanying part of that is own your data. Like, always try to find a strategy for getting as much of your data into a agnostic warehouse as possible. Where that warehouse is and who hosts it and all that other stuff matters a little bit less, but definitely look to have data ownership, and then look to have tools that will give you some runway beyond your use case today.
Alex, thank you for answering with a lot of the technical pieces. I do want to talk about not necessarily a pitfall, but a side step that I see a lot of organizations go through at the onset of their data journey, especially as it relates to EHR data and data quality. Now, all of a sudden, you are using awards insights, let's say, you have a different visualization of your data in awards. And while this is great and fantastic, it is also very telling about some of the data quality you have in awards. So very often at onset, people tend to say, oh, wow, look at, I don't want to call it bad data, but bad data quality, maybe typos, errors. And they pull themselves away, perhaps, for a moment on the insights and the visualization to go back to awards and either rethink about a process they're currently doing, a form that they're using, how they're entering in a field. So it's almost like a pause from data after you start seeing it in a way that you haven't really been able to see it before. So not a pitfall, ultimately really, really great things, but certainly kind of a pause in the data journey, if you will, or a combination. What else surfaces when you start exploring your data that way?
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Yeah, this is not always going to be a team or tech problem to solve, right? Like, and I think Megan's 100% right. I think when we've implemented some of these solutions, folks almost always have to hit pause and say, this data is not actually what we think it is, and some of it has to change in terms of how it's being entered and stored. You can't write a query to get your way out of every problem.
So I know we've touched on kind of some of the way that we approach. We've mentioned items like awards and insights and data studio. Not everyone on our conversation here today is an awards user. So can we just touch a little bit on, and we did a little bit earlier, but maybe just the way that we kind of flow or our ideal, right? So we have SciSense, we have the warehouse, the data warehouse, and then we have our awards or FCM. If you're not one of our clients, how would they, what are systems out there, or what, like, I guess SciSense is the data analytics tool or the visualization. So maybe just mapping out so people kind of understand those parts a little bit. Hopefully that makes sense what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this in the beginning, but we can restate it because it doesn't hurt to go over this. So you'll have your source data, right? You have like your case management system, your care management system. I'm trying to think of what, call center data. Like, we know a lot of folks are using Salesforce for that these days. So you'll have your source systems. You're going to then need write up, we call it the pipeline. And a pipeline, again, extract, transform, and load are the big letters there, ETL or ELT. You're going to want to have a tool that automates this. So there's a bunch of them. Just to name a couple, like Fivetran, Stitch, Airflow. They're all automation tools that take the data out and maybe do some transformation. Another transformation tool is called dbt. Again, we do a lot of this, so you don't have to worry with this. You're going to want to transform the data so that the data has what's called a primary key, right? You need to be able to link disparate parts of data together. So like if you're using Salesforce because you have an awesome mental health call center and you're logging your calls in there, you're going to want to make sure that there's a way that you can link the consumer record from your Salesforce to what's going on in awards, in case, so you have a record of that, like consumers activity, if they, move from being someone that called the number to then being admitted into the program, maybe in the future. So that's the transformation step. And then you need to load it somewhere, right? So we talk about warehouses a lot. There's something bigger called a data lake, which sounds like a place you go to relax with your data, I guess. But a data lake is just, there's actually a bunch of units. There's a mart, which is smaller, a warehouse, which is composed of different marts, and then a lake, which is bigger than that. So that's, if you were looking at this in a way that's completely agnostic from Foothold, you have your sources, you need to move your sources through the pipeline, and then you need to keep them somewhere called the warehouse. And then on top of that, you can put like analytics software. So you can plug analytics software into your warehouse and do awesome data exploration work there. You can plug data discovery tools, like a lot of folks that are doing research will use Python or R to ask questions of the data. Or you can send that data somewhere else. Maybe you have a funder that wants your raw data and you want to send it to their data warehouse. Or maybe you have a really smart engineer on staff and you've built an app, and they've built an app that's helping your direct service providers. There's all kinds of really awesome use cases. And I think this also goes back to the beginning of the call. Like Megan and I have been genuinely surprised in a really positive way to see how folks are using our data tools. So yeah, I think that might answer the question. Megan, not sure if you have anything to add.
No, you're the tech guy, and I know later tonight I want to have like a Cosmo by the data lake that you described. So
so we're coming up to the hour, but we have a couple more questions, and I'm going to do another poll, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So, a lot of our organizations may or may not have specific people that are, assigned to do data analytics. I feel like we're seeing that more and more within our organizations. Are there specific skills in those roles that you should be asking or thinking about as you're either trying to get someone to fill that role or trying to hire someone outside?
So I think a data analyst is kind of a trained person in data analytics. So if they have the requisite training is always probably a good first step. And also understanding what tools they're familiar and comfortable with might get you further along. And I know that I see what questions are coming. So I want to just preface this a little bit. But what would be an extra bonus, a feather in the cap of this candidate, is if they're familiar with the services that the agency or the organization is providing and the needed outputs. Just because I think sometimes the data team doesn't fully know the definition or the work that's happening day to day. So simply linguistics, the words that the service side is using versus what the data person's looking for doesn't always line up. So someone who has some experience in what the organization does is just kind of icing on the cake.
And I think that leads us kind of to our final question. So, and Alex, you mentioned like, let's throw all these teams together and have a pizza party. But what roles and teams do need to work together in an agency to foster this integrated data culture? Are there more than kind of the three that you mentioned, or are those three really the driving divisions or areas?
I just like to put a shout out if your agency is in Northern New Jersey or in Manhattan and you're having the pizza party, you can feel free to invite me. I like pizza. But to seriously answer Elliot's question, yeah, I think that shadow IT concept is really borne out. I think that it's like there used to be like a role definitely called QA manager that I think is now evolving into several different roles, like director of analytics or director of quality improvement. And those are like, as we know at a behavioral healthcare agency, those roles are massive, like super maybe a little underappreciated, but super influential as well. So I think I would almost love to that team is going to know the why probably better. And I think as that role can best evangelize the why, you can pick up support from other groups like program directors and the revenue cycle management team potentially, and get executive sponsorship as well. And then also make sure you have a really good relationship with the IT department, because they are going to be awesome from a procurement point of view, and then also to support your ongoing efforts in terms of the infrastructure that's needed to support this. So always lead with why, and then I actually think that there is almost a specific answer, not for every organization, but for many, because there's definitely some IT managers that know the why and can actually do an awesome job with leading. And they're honestly, sometimes it is the revenue cycle management person that does that too, right? So it's gonna and then also there's executives who do a great job with that too. So it's going to depend on the agency, but whoever can kind of get sponsorship and start to build the connections between the groups I described, I think that that's always going to be a ticket to success.
I think whoever's why is being solved for in the moment has to be part of the conversation, the team. You know, the revenue cycle management person might be the data person, but may not know much about how to track someone's trends and goals and success over time, and how the program person is putting that data in is important to be able to get the data out in an understandable way. So whoever's why is at the table in the moment needs to be part of the solution, the discussion, the translation.